علي علي oh علي وصي النبي علي 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 علي. O land of Najaf, tell me of his death when he went to pray in Masjid Kufa, in Masjid Kufa. Ali Ali oh Ali وصي النبي علي Ali 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 Ali. He left a mark in Zainab's heart. She was so sad to see him go, to see him go. Ali Ali oh Ali وصي النبي علي Ali 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 Ali. It was the month of Ramadan. He broke his fast. It was his last. It was his last. Ali Ali oh Ali وصي النبي علي Ali 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 Ali. He called adhan, faced the Qibla, and stood to pray, and stood to pray. Ali Ali oh Ali وصي النبي علي Ali 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 Ali. During sujood, Ali was struck with a poisoned sword, a poisoned sword. Ali Ali oh Ali وصي النبي علي Ali 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 Ali. Jibreel called, telling the world Ali had fell, Ali had fell, Ali had fell. Ali Ali oh Ali وصي النبي علي Ali 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 Ali. He showed kindness to his killer that hit his head, that hit his head. Ali Ali oh Ali وصي النبي علي Ali 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 Ali. Ali was just, Ali was fair, Ali was like no other air, no other air. Ali Ali oh Ali وصي النبي علي Ali 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 Ali. O land of Najaf, let us come visit the grave of Ali, the grave of Ali. Ali Ali oh Ali وصي النبي علي Ali 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 Ali. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.